It's finally my pleasure to introduce our moderator tonight. She's a leader with both a PhD and an MBA who has led research organizations across the country for more than 2 decades. She's a sought-after speaker and influential advocate for women in STEM. Most recently, she was featured on a Women in Bio panel highlighting women executives in life sciences across Los Angeles. Please join me in welcoming our moderator tonight, HMRI's President and CEO, Dr. Julia Bradsher.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. So just want to make sure everyone can hear me. My mic's on? Okay, great. So tonight, welcome to our event, and we're going to be using an interesting metaphor tonight. It's a clinical one. So I want us to think of the American scientific enterprise as our patient. And this gathering is a grand rounds to look at this particular patient. So I'm going to set the stage a little bit more than Paul did. For decades, federal investment, especially through the National Institutes of Health, has de-risked biomedical discovery, helping biotech and pharmaceutical innovators deliver breakthrough treatments and cement America's leadership in science. That model has produced well over 100 Nobel laureates in medicine and physiology here in the United States. But today, the vital signs are mixed for our patient. Research budgets are flat, clinical trials crawl, immigration pathways for scientific talent are narrowing, public trust in science is under strain, and translation from bench to bedside still takes far too long. And yet the future is radiant with possibility, as Paul talked about. Artificial intelligence, genomic medicine, data-driven tools, and transforming how we discover, diagnose, and heal. So the question is whether our institutions, policies, and values can evolve fast enough to meet the need and meet our moment that we're in. So we're going to begin with a diagnostic. What symptoms most concern our panelists and move towards prognosis? How to sustain discovery amid fiscal constraint, rebuild a diverse and purpose-driven talent pool and pipeline, and recalibrate the culture of science for an age of exponential data. This is not a eulogy, it's a grand round on our future. So we're not here to admire the patient's decline, we're here to look at how we intervene strategically, urgently, and with the tools of evidence, innovation, and shared purpose. So now I'm going to introduce our panelists, and our panelists are our Grand Rounds leaders. Dr. Shlomo Melmed is the Dean of the Medical Faculty at Cedars-Sinai, one of the country's largest academic medical enterprises, and his pioneering research in endocrinology has transformed the treatment for pituitary disorders, and his leadership has shaped how we train physicians and organize medical research nationwide. He brings a unique perspective from a leading major academic research medical center to our panel. Dr. Scott Kaiser is a family physician, a geriatrician, and the CEO of Determined Health, which is a company advancing models of care that treat human connection as a determinant of well-being. He also directs geriatric cognitive health at the Pacific Neuroscience Institute and serves on the board of BrightFocus Foundation, a major funder of Alzheimer's and vision research. Dr. Kaiser brings a perspective of both a private practice physician and an entrepreneur in the healthcare space. And then finally, Dr. Angelika Niemz is the Dean of the Henry E. Riggs School of Applied Life Sciences at Keck Graduate Institute in Claremont. Her background bridges chemistry, engineering, and biotechnology. She's trained a generation of scientists and innovators at the intersection of academia and industry, and she understands firsthand how educational institutions are adapting or struggling to adapt to this era of rapid change. She brings a perspective from an academic research and from the perspective of a scientist who was trained outside of the United States. So now we're going to start with our opening round of discussion, vital signs. Tonight, we're going to start by taking a very quick diagnostic, what we're going to call our vital signs of American science. So I'd like for each one of you, in a short 1 minute or less, share one, either a key concern or a promising sign that captures where you think the patient stands today. It could be a symptom or it could be a signal of strength. So I'll start, Scott, with you, and we'll work this way.
Okay, great. Well, I mean, first of all, I'll start just again by reinforcing my perspective here. So one is, as a clinician focused on the care of older people, as a geriatrician. Two, as an entrepreneur who's started a company that spun out of a nonprofit that's depended on NIH funding to get going. And then three, as was said, being on the board of the BrightFocus Foundation, an organization which supports research in Alzheimer's disease, macular degeneration, and glaucoma, and the perspective, as we are a funder of science, of what the scientific community is going through. So that's sort of the lens in terms of when you ask for my diagnostic impressions. And, you know, I want to add, you know, I won't speak exactly to my impression of the stability of the patient, to stick with the metaphor, but I will speak to the urgency. And to me, we have to consider the aging population. Demography is a critical factor in terms of the urgency of maintaining prominency of science, scientific advancement, scientific research. You know, we are approaching the first time in human history where we're going to have more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 18. And with that comes great opportunities and great challenges. With aging, we've extended, thanks to scientific advancement, we've had a 30-year gain in life expectancy over the last century. But with that extension of lifespan, we haven't necessarily had always a consistent extension of health span. And so the rise of neurodegenerative illnesses, age-related conditions, if we just think about Alzheimer's alone, how urgent that makes this mission to put the pedal to the metal and accelerate scientific discovery and advancement. And I'll probably share a little bit more again about the dynamics of an aging population, but I'll leave it at that and just say, not time to let up, time to go, go, go.
Thank you. Angelika?
All right. Well, to add to this discussion, I am bringing the perspective, as you have mentioned, of an educator and also of a immigrant. I'm actually born and raised in Germany, and I came to the United States in 1993 during my PhD. And what prompted me to stay here in the United States is the opportunities, right? You know, I knew that I was going to pursue an academic career path. Here in the United States, at that time, there were so many more opportunities, specifically for women in science. You know, as an assistant professor, the autonomy you had, you know, the ability to get your own funding, your own lab, everything. And so I think that right now, unfortunately, we're seeing junior scientists making decisions, whether it's in their PhD or at the beginning of their academic career or in general. They're looking for other countries, right? So we are no longer able to attract the top talent pool and then also retaining our top talent pool, right? So our bench strength is, you know, there's the danger that our bench strength is being compromised. And so I think that maintaining that talent pool is going to be a critical, you know, determinant of our future competitiveness.
Thank you. Shlomo?
Thank you. And thanks for the opportunity of meeting all of you. I'm going to make a diagnosis or a differential diagnosis coming from the lens of a physician scientist who drives to my hospital every morning with the notion that people are sick and people deserve our healing. And we are, in essence, a healing profession. And so when I look at the patient today, I'm going to be a little bit provocative and say, I don't really share the tension and the panic inherent in your question and in some of the answers. I don't think that the crisis in NIH is going to be permanent. I think that we're going to have wise politicians on both sides of the aisle who are going to realize that medical research, for selfish reasons, is good for them and good for us. I do worry far more about Medicare because the fact that Medicare is too expensive is a bipartisan issue. It's not a partisan issue, and that scares me far more than any threat from NIH. But when I do look at the diagnostic, my first differential diagnosis, which worries me about the patient, is the intellectual rigor and the ability to dream and be curious by our young people. I think that our young people, our students, our residents, our postdocs, our junior faculty are at risk because that is where the problem lies. And I think it's simplistic of us to point fingers at ourselves, at our society, at our political chaos as the reason for why the patient is ill. I think the inherent reason why the patient is ill is the quality of the intellectual rigor of our young people. And I'm happy to expand if there's time.
Well, you know, I'd like to add an interesting data point to that, and that is really relevant for both your commentary and Angelika, is that the average age of an NIH first-time R01 award today is around 43.
Right.
That means it takes almost 20 years of your career before you get that first award, which is sort of the gold standard for when you've kind of made it if you get an R01. And when I was just starting out in the 90s, the average age was in the low 30s. So it's increased significantly. And that's probably true, Angelika, from when you started as well. Well, let's shift gears a little bit and focus in on some of the main areas that we want to drill into. And the first one is modernizing oversight. So regulation has been a part of our system for a long time. And really, in many ways, the regulatory system, especially for medicine, came of age at a time when antibiotics and really chemical treatments were becoming, pharmaceuticals were becoming in vogue. And the regulation has not really shifted significantly. There have been small tweaks, but it's really still the same FDA regulatory system. So one of the things I wanted to pose here is, how can regulation keep pace with things like AI, genomics, translational science without eroding public trust? So anybody want to start there or comment?
Well, I can try to take a stab at it. So there's always a tension, right? The FDA, I think, is committed to ensuring that we can advance innovation, that we can get new treatments to patients, and that we can encourage clinicians, physicians to actually implement them in their practice, while at the same time ensuring that there's safety and efficacy, right? And we've had several historical circumstances. CDRH was basically founded on the premise, they had mammography that gave very inconsistent results, and then that led to mistreatment of, like women with presumed breast cancer. And so in the realm of next generation sequencing, right? That's one of the topics that you had brought up. The problem is, and we have some experts in the audience, there's so much new knowledge being generated, right, that it is really hard to come up with guidelines because we're all learning together, right? So the NIH has published guidelines for use of next generation sequences for inherited disorders, right? Still working on oncology. Metagenomics is, like far out in the future. And I think that they're really, I don't think that it's fair to say that FDA has not changed. There definitely is a dialogue ongoing, right? There's collaboration between the FDA and the scientific community to ensure that the guidelines, when they come out, ensure that we meet the needs of the patients while also enabling innovation and, advancement of science.
Comment.
So I totally agree with you, and I would add to that. First of all, on the regulatory side, we at Cedars-Sinai today, we are in the middle of a phase 2 trial. We've finished the phase 1 one of the very first in the world where we are injecting stem cells into the brain of ALS patients. And these stem cells are manufacturing nerve growth factor. And the phase 1 trial was successful in terms of safety. And now we're looking at efficacy. And I don't know what the results will show because the trial is still ongoing. But I can tell you that getting that trial going, we had all the science, our clinicians were there, our neurosurgeons were there for the injection. We developed our own manipulative injection material and focused injection into the brain. We developed the stem cells themselves. We developed the growth factor. And the FDA process took 3 years. With the first submission of the trial was 10,000 pages. I kid you not. We've got slides showing the photographs. And in those days, this was before PDFs. This was 6 years ago. And we actually had to get a Federal Express to take these files to the FDA, paper files. So that's on the regulatory side. On the AI side, I think that science has accelerated so quickly. In fact, I was at a meeting yesterday. We had a Future of Health meeting. People were talking about health AI. It's not a lake of knowledge. It's not even an ocean of knowledge. It's a river of knowledge. Health AI is developing faster than the human brain can even perceive. So now we have a council to oversee our AI applications, and we have AI applications throughout the medical center. We've created a department of computational medicine. It's a brand new specialty. We've got a PhD program in AI in medicine, which was unheard of 3 years ago. And we're recruiting the brightest people who are graduating from medical school into these programs now. But, and I'll give you a perfect example of where regulatory comes in. We now have done away with your doctor typing in the computer while she or he talks to you. And we all hate that. The doctor can't look you in the eye. They're busy worrying about, am I getting the stuff right and the billing and the coding. And so we've done away with it all. We now have an AI program, and it's called Ambient AI. It listens to the doctor and the patient talking and listens to the doctor examining the patient and prints out a full consultation, full differential diagnosis with references. It even orders the medication to be delivered to your home from your pharmacy. So that evening, you will get your medication ordered by this AI. The doctor has to sign and edit that report. But that's great, right? Sounds wonderful. And it works, and doctors love it because their pajama time at night, which used to be 3 hours of doing their catching up on their reports, is now down by, this last trial we did was down by 47%. And instead of spending 3 hours, they're now spending just over an hour and a half. So doctors love it, patients like it. And some patients are saying to us, if you don't use AI, I don't want to come and see you. However, there are another group of patients. The doctor will ask the patient their sexual history. Will ask the patient, how was your divorce? Did the lawyer treat you nicely? Were there problems with your mother-in-law? The AI is listening. The AI is listening. And the programmers tell us that at the end of that consultation, the doctor can redact that information and it'll disappear. But where is it going to disappear? Who is holding the fact that I don't like my mother-in-law and that it's somewhere in North Korea, there's somebody listening and saying, well, so-and-so living in Los Angeles and this is his address and he's got heart disease or he has diabetes and he hates his mother-in-law. So where our privacy is gone. We don't know how to deal with that. So do you want your doctor to talk to you and not type, or do you want to compromise your privacy? We haven't solved that problem.
That's an interesting problem to solve.
I don't care if somebody listens to what I think we are. As long as the quality of care is better.
And that definitely pushes the envelope around regulatory and oversight.
Yeah.
Because privacy is such an important part of who we are in the United States, privacy, our private lives. Scott, anything else you want to add?
Well, I mean, sticking with the privacy thing, it's interesting because consistently people have been, they have a lot of reservations about their privacy, but then they readily give it up for consumer convenience.
True. Yeah.
But healthcare is always the last frontier in terms of how we really iron out these privacy issues. But there are so many challenges. I mean, I don't envy the regulators or whoever's going to figure out a better regulatory framework, because I don't see how. I mean, the current regulatory processes definitely need to be changed. I mean, that's ridiculous, the examples that you shared. But you can't just do away with regulation, too. I mean, it's a real rock and a hard place conundrum. So I don't envy. The frameworks don't even make sense. They don't keep up with. They're not consistent with the kind of tools and applications that we have today. And then the amount of time that investigators have to spend on administrative things, it's just insane. I don't know how you feel in terms of when you were talking about the ideas and the vision and the energy of the next generation, how that plays into it when there's in this just highly regulated administrative burden. I know on the clinician side, that's been a huge challenge of just, the soul being sucked out of medical practice. I'm hoping these tools help bring it back, that ironically, these technological intermediaries will enable us to get back to what really matters in terms of that personal relationship, because so much of medicine and so much of health really boils down to personal relationships. So, but not an easy task. Glad that's above my pay grade.
Well, let's talk for a few minutes about discovery and how we sustain discovery. So we know that, at least with federal funding, there's been flat budgets, rising costs. What are some of the new financial, technological, or collaborative models that could sustain innovation differently than what we have today?
Well, I mean, I would just want to add to what you were saying, Shlomo, in terms of bipartisan agreement around the importance of research funding, even just for very self-interested reasons. And I was looking at some of the stats. 2024 NIH funding generated $96 billion in economic activity and generated over 400,000 jobs. Every $1 invested in NIH funding generated $2.56 in economic return. So that's a really great return on investment. And so we saw in July, when the administration tried to cut NIH funding, there was bipartisan support, and we thank goodness that didn't happen. That said, I mean, we still are feeling, hopefully, as you're saying, it's a blip, but some of the impacts from the initial chaos, and then you think about outside of NIH, all these contracts that were cut by DOGE. In terms of there will be people who have looked who've moved away, postdocs who didn't get positions, faculty. So I know I didn't answer your question, and I can come back to that. But it looks like, Shlomo, you want to add something?
I want to add something.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I totally agree with you, and I hear what you're saying, and your facts are correct. But I think that there are bigger challenges than NIH and DOGE. In California now, for academic medical centers who are at the pinnacle of discovery, we are the ones who are doing the new innovation. We are the ones who are bringing clinical trials to our patients. We are the ones who are bringing into our communities the benefits of healthcare science. For us, the big threats are federally is, again, Medicare. Medicare is a huge threat to academic medicine, because Medicare going forward every year is being ratcheted and ratcheted and ratcheted, so that we don't have the oxygen as institutions to provide the clinical research and the clinical activity and even the physician time to devote to research, because you just can't pay your rent with what Medicare is paying. And in California, we have an added burden, which dwarfs NIH. And that is, for those of you involved in healthcare, there is now a rule by our beloved people in Sacramento. We now have a law in California capping healthcare increases. We cannot increase costs by more than 3.5% a year, period. That's the new law in California. And if you're all aware of that, which means if you're going to give your nurses a 4% increase or a 5% increase, and God knows they deserve it, you've got to eat that 2%. And if you're going to buy a brand new AI-driven CAT scan, which is going to breach your cost structure by more than 3.5%, you've got to eat that. Those numbers dwarf what the NIH budget is. And that, I think, for medical advances, I'm not talking about NSF funding, and I'm not talking about basic science, I'm talking about clinical, fundamental, translational clinical research. That is a huge challenge. That scares me far more than NIH. Again, I say, I'm sure we as a society will resolve NIH, will resolve DOGE. But if we don't resolve Medicare and the California suppression of growth in a very irrational way, I think we are in for some very rough times over the next 5 years. That's just the way I read the realities of our fiscal strategy.
And I actually agree. But back to the DOGE and why I say hopefully it's a blip. I mean, whole institutes that were dedicated to figuring out how to better care for high-risk, high-need populations that are responsible for a huge driver of costs in Medicare and Medicaid, doing incredible work, health services work, trying to figure out better programming, better approaches that are value-based, that will deliver better outcomes and reduce costs, that are all working, just got decimated.
Yes, that's true.
And it's going to take some time for that to recover. So I think that I 100% agree. That's the elephant in the room when you look at the size in terms of the federal budget. But one goes, they go hand in hand. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that just coming back to the question that you had asked about, how can we sustain innovation given our current, fiscal situation? I do think, so there are funding, so you can get funding from industry, from federal sources, from foundations, from industry, right? In the current climate, I mean, even before our current administration, like you were saying, the average age of the first independent R1 has risen dramatically. And the problem really is that for new investigators, and I mean, I forgot, you mentioned the quality of the younger generation. I have been in a situation that I've been writing proposals and trying to get them through study sections, and I've served on many study sections. Yeah. I think our system is a little bit flawed in that we want to have that preliminary data. NIH panels, you're supposed to be high risk, high reward. Most panels are not really along those lines, right? They want to see that you've basically got 60% of the work done, and then they give you the money. And it's also highly skewed towards the larger institutes, right? Because you have investigator and environment as 2 of the 5 review criteria at the NIH, right? So even beyond, like what's currently ongoing, it's been an uphill battle. The problem really is that industry will step in and will acquire, like you will, license your technology or, start a company and then they will be acquired. But industry wants to make sure that their assets are de-risked. They will come in later in the game. They will not fund the fundamental research. And I do think that there's a real need to sustain our fundamental research, right? That is what a lot of what NIH funding is going towards. That's what NSF funding is going towards. And that is the type, I mean, I forgot, I had a conversation, in terms of getting your Nobel Prize, right? Most Nobel laureates have done their key discoveries before the age of 35, right? And so it takes decades for a fundamental discovery to really translate into the types of, like the advances that we are currently seeing. And what we're missing out right now is not going to really rear its ugly head within the next 5 years or even 10 years. We're talking decades down the line.
So I want to pick up on something that all three of you have really touched on, and we haven't used this term, but this public-private partnership potentially is something that needs to transform differently than what because it's been a bit of a public de-risking, then private sector takes it from there. Is there something that we need to be doing earlier on that's a public-private joint effort earlier on?
Yes, absolutely. And we've got to put our money where our mouth is. And we as public institutions, as charities, as nonprofits, what we do is we actually invest in early stage promising technology and then go to industry. And that has been extremely successful for us. We've had some magnificent payoffs, and it's all because we actually took the risk. And I think the successful medical institutions today around the country, if you look around, the successful ones are those who nurture and invest and put their money into their own discoveries and de-risk them before leveraging it quantum wise in going out to industry. So that's a change, because that traditionally wasn't the case. And traditionally, a bright scientist would file a patent and we'd sell the patent, and that was it, or you get a license. Today, we're actually reinvesting and developing and incubating the companies ourselves, and only then going to industry. That's been a change, and it's been a very successful for many of us in the country now. And I think that could be a partial answer to future funding streams to support biomedicine. But at the end of the day, it is those institutions who are prepared to take that risk that I believe will succeed.
Where
And
does
that-
funding come from?
Well, I was going to say that implies even avoiding, not even going to the NIH, not even getting the government involved in funding, but self-funding discovery.
If you've hired a scientist and you believe in them, and you believe in their IP, and you really believe that this is going to be valuable, then you as an institution should be prepared to de-risk and put seed money into it. Not the whole thing, but seed money.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was thinking is that,
Well,
yeah, that's a lot of investment. And I mean, most institutes, I mean, maybe it depends on, like the depth of your purse, but,
Correct,
in most
correct.
cases, we do have seed funding, but in terms of the purpose of seed funding is to generate enough preliminary data that you can go out and get that NIH grant.
Correct.
Right? So at some point in time, it has to come from somewhere. And if it doesn't come from private sources, then it has to come from, federal grants.
And that's a big role for us at BrightFocus.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah,
Just
so
speak a little bit about that.
we have about 50 million in research that we're currently supporting, active research at the moment, and a lot of that is spread across early investigators. And then we have specific programming for early investigators, fast tracks, where we provide mentorship and guidance, because there are these valleys that they have to get through. But what I love about that is not just that, we're doing great research that's having an impact, but that's mostly from the generosity of our 600,000 plus donors. To me, it's really an amazing model that, people, across the country are chipping in, and we even have people send, a $5 bill or a check. I don't know, my kids would laugh at me if I wrote a check, but who are sending their check in the mail. We have a whole operation where the people open the mail and deposit the checks and everything, and check by check, person by person, 600,000 people all contributing. It makes a difference. And we're able to get these early investigators over the hump to where they can then get their independent funding. And I think that's a great model. I'd love to see more of that. I'd love to see more of I'm very interested in your perspective vis-a-vis stem cells in terms of broader public supported initiatives, public-private partnerships. I think a lot of this, actually, these creative financing approaches could be critical to the challenges you brought up. around the cost of Medicare, in terms of social impact bonds, the fact that we can actually we can develop innovations that will pay off in the long run and deliver a return to private investors.
So as a segue into our next topic around talent, I want to bring up, there's an event going on the East Coast right now. The Milken Institute is doing the health future of health. And Paul and I were talking about this earlier. And one of the things that the head of Milken Institute said was, he said, when I look back at all the investments made in later career, mid-career, and early career scientists, if I had to boil it all down, I wish I'd put all the money into early career scientists. And so it makes me think about this idea that we have to turn upside down kind of this pyramid of waiting till you're a seasoned scientist to be at the top. So how do we reframe this to get to where we put more investment into those early career scientists? Because the NIH hasn't been able to make it happen.
I would start earlier. I would start far earlier than the junior faculty and the young scientists. I would start by taking all telephones and throwing them away from all high school kids, because we have created an entire generation of TikTok thinkers or TikTok non-thinkers. And with all the goodwill in the world and all the money in the world and a thriving NIH and a booming Medicare and great philanthropy, if the individual student who's coming in lacks curiosity, then we're not going to succeed. So I would take issue with that statement that this gentleman made, and I would go much earlier than junior faculty. We've got to start in high school. And I think that is the serious problem we're facing. The problems that we're talking about now are tactical. The strategic, if you're looking at us from a strategic 30,000 feet, that is our problem, our intellectual capital. And that's something which we've allowed to be squandered. And I don't see it being anybody addressing it.
It's funny too, because if you mentioned curiosity and people in this field who are looking at the impact of technology on the intellectual rigor of people and young people in particular, their biggest fear about AI is that that's really the curiosity killer.
Right.
When you can just immediately just have access to any answer, any information. So I think stimulating and fostering that curiosity is going to be key.
The scary thing is when I'm sure you had the same experience. When we were young, we were intellectually hungry. We were curious. We tried to get the best jobs we could. And when you went for a job interview for your residency or for a junior faculty position, you were prepared and you read up on the background of the mentor you were talking to. Today, they ask you, well, how much vacation am I going to get? And what time can I go home? And do I have to work on weekends? I said, well, if you're in a cardiac surgery residency program, then yes. When your patient needs urgent surgery on a Saturday night, yes. And they don't get it. And that, I think, is a problem.
Well, I mean, can I have a dissenting opinion?
Of course.
I mean, as an educator, okay, I'm a professor, I teach, and I'm also the dean of faculty, so I talk with a lot of my colleagues about challenges in the classroom. I think my job as an educator is for me to be able to teach the students, and I disagree with people that are saying, oh, our students are too stupid to learn, right? I say I'm too stupid to teach. And I think that if you really, I love our students, right? I have not had that kind of experience. Yes, we obviously need to be very cognizant about training students to use, ChatGPT in a responsible manner. But overall, I think the curiosity is there. And I think that for us as educators, it is important to, provide the opportunities to prepare students for the real world. And it is important, like in an academic setting, If you're going to fail, fail there, right? Learn your lessons while you're still, in school, undergraduate, graduate education. So when you're going out into the world, when you're in your first job, that you are prepared and that you can succeed.
I hear you're the experts and you're educating undergraduates and you're doing a great job and you're running a great institution. And whatever you said, I totally accept. However, in the real world, we have huge shortages in people with their bachelor degrees. They don't want to work. They want to work 3 hours a day. They want to work 2 days a week. They want to work 5 days a week. You can't get it. If you're in West Los Angeles today, you cannot get a CAT scan on a Sunday night because the technician who's earning over $100,000 a year does not want to work on weekends. And that person has trained at a good college and they've got a good bachelor's degree and yet their whole ethos is different to what it was. I think that we have to fundamentally reignite curiosity. I'm happy that you see so many students who you are instilling curiosity. By the time they come to their graduate situations as residents and fellows, we see a change in the hunger and the curiosity, in the need to solve problems, and I wish it wasn't that way. And this is across the country. The brightest students today are not going into cancer research. They're not going into diabetes research. They're not going into Alzheimer's research. If they're doing medicine, they're going into orthopedic surgery and ENT and urology, the practical, very important specialties. But they're not going into the specialties which drive intellectual development. And that's worrying. That's worrying.
Well, I was going to play the central position, but I will say they're not going into geriatric medicine
That's
either,
right,
which
they're
is
not.
really
And they should be.
is ridiculous.
They're not.
10,000 people turning 65 every day and less than 7,000 geriatricians. I mean, and it's a purely intellectual specialty. We don't have any high-paying procedures. So that's. But I'd say the good news is we're having healthy dissent, and we all clearly agree that more investment in education.
Let me give you evidence, okay? Let me open the New England Journal of Medicine, open Science and open Nature, and you will see the number of articles, of good articles coming out of American institutions with American sounding names, and coming from non-American institutions with non-American sounding names. And you can see a dramatic shift in the last 10 years between the phenomenal science that is coming out of overseas. And that shows that we are losing that race of being able to be curious and to discover and to be imaginative. And the facts are there. And so I think that is something we've got to worry about. That is something which we look to you, the educators, to help us with.
So one more point from you, Angelika, and then I have a different question I want to ask that's related.
Okay. When I came to the United States, right, I came from a system that was, Germany for many decades has been number one by PhDs in chemistry, right? Number one in chemistry. It was all book learning, right? Many countries, very rigorous education, it's all book learning. When I came to the United States, what really, really opened my eyes was it's not the puzzle pieces that matter, it's how you put the puzzle pieces together. It was a fundamentally different way of learning, and that really has enabled me to excel in my PhD, in my postdoc, and succeed in my career. And so I think that what we really need to do, and I agree with you about the need for education. It's not just, like conveying facts to our students. And it is true that a lot of undergraduate courses are just facts. It's really about how do you take the puzzle pieces, how do you put the puzzle pieces together. And I know that compared to many other countries, right, we're actually not doing a bad job in that.
So I want to shift a little bit to this concept of how can we make scientific careers more viable? and also make them curiosity or purpose-driven again? How can we make them curiosity-driven again?
You the expert.
I don't know if I'm the expert. I mean, I actually am very happy to have several of my students sitting in the audience, so maybe we should ask them. So I think that fear motivation is it's not a sustainable business model, right? And I think that a lot of our, I mean, in different fields, right? Like when you're going into medical school, right? It is very tough, right? Like making it through the MCAT, like getting through step 1, step 2, everything, right? There's so much of our education that is built on fear, right? Which really kills the curiosity. And I think that we need to shift our focus away from just, getting that GPA, away from just, meeting those milestones to, just being a geek, right? Just loving what you're doing, right? And just, I mean, I remember when I was applying for grants, right? I had my research group, I had my big NIH grant, which needed to be renewed. If I didn't get that grant, I would have to fire my postdocs, I would have to shut down the lab. When you're sitting there at 3:00 in the morning, that's not the best motivation, right? So I had to just shut that out of my brain. I had to completely reframe it and just go like, wow, I love what I'm proposing. I really love the science. I have some great ideas. I'm going to have to explain why these ideas are wonderful. And I just think that overall, we need to shift away from fear motivation to actually being excited about what we're doing.
So I'm going to take the role of a panelist for a second, because I think that one of the things, I just want to answer a question that Shlomo asked. And I want to go back to when I was a child, probably around 6, 7 years old. And we would go on family trips in the car. There were 4 children sitting in the back seat and my parents in the front seat. And when we would drive...
No seatbelts.
No seatbelts, that's right. And we would drive down the road, and the thing that I remember most about those family trips in the car was that I was constantly asking my parents a question, and the question was why? Why is why is that color? Why does that look that way? Why this? Why that? And I remember one time very specifically, one of my brothers said, could you just get her out of the car and have her stop asking why? And so I think that one of the things that we don't do enough anymore is ask the question why. And we don't encourage people to ask the question why, because the answer may be difficult to answer, or there may not be an answer. But that is the fundamental of curiosity. And I will tell you that one of the things that AI has done for me is I don't have to ask anyone why anymore. I just ask ChatGPT.
As long as you get the right answer.
But what's interesting is, for me, is that asking ChatGPT, I usually ask the facts, and then it stimulates my curiosity as opposed to answering the questions, because I don't take just the answer. It makes me ask more questions, and it's become almost like fueling my curiosity, which is, I think, a benefit of AI. Okay, so.
But it's not just STEM. It's not just curiosity. It's when I say intellectual rigor, I don't just mean curiosity. And I'll give you an example. I mean just a worldview, which was, maybe I'm old-fashioned. Well, I am old-fashioned, which was different. So I'll give you an example. So about a year ago, I decided to take my lab to the opera. And there were 12 of us. And all young people, bright. We choose, hopefully, the best, and they're really smart and hardworking and getting great papers and all good and no problem. None of them had ever been to an opera. And none of them, not one. And they went to good schools, and they were great kids, and they are great people. But it's different. And I think back, and when I was that age, anybody who was a postdoc or was in medical school or any graduate school had been to one opera or had read Shakespeare. And So when I talk about intellectual rigor, it's not just curiosity. It's the whole milieu which the cell phone has taken away from our young generation.
Yeah.
It's not just why, it's wow. It's
Yeah.
the wow factor that I feel we're missing, and I'm glad that you recognize that you're trying to correct that, and all the power to you, and anything we do to help you do that for the undergrads.
So I want us, we're getting over time, and so I want us to kind of wrap up with one other segment, and that is the pace and the culture of science. How do we balance the speed that is almost built into the concepts that we're now dealing with around AI and data-driven science, and how do we balance speed and synthesis with being able to grow and still have reproducibility and really be able to manage that growth?
Great question.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very, I'm going to divert again to because the thing that I worry about with the pace and the speed is just because I think a through line through all of these things is about trust and trust in science and how to preserve trust. And so I'm concerned in this era of sort of relative truth and how technology can play a role in perpetuating that's more than speed. Even to me, that's a real concern. We've got to have reinforce trust in science and medicine and in institutions and in facts.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing that's very interesting in terms of AI use, right? So all large publishing houses now have AI policies, right? Where basically you cannot let ChatGPT write your journal article and come up with references, because number one, ChatGPT will give you what you're asking, right? And a lot of times it comes up with sources that are just fabricated or they're irrelevant to what it is you're saying. And if we allow these things to slip, then that is a huge, huge detriment to our science, right? And I mean, another thing that's really funny in terms of an educator, which I mean, my students will vouch for that. I'm like a huge opponent of using ChatGPT to write your papers. Students will write their papers using ChatGPT, and then the instructor will use ChatGPT to grade the papers. So, I mean, that is just, like a travesty. So I think that we just have to be very, very, very careful that in this world there are many, many wonderful advances, but that you can also misuse it. And so just making sure we maintain our scientific integrity.
I think you're asking a very important question. So people are already complaining that medical school is too long. You've got 4 years of undergrad, you've got 4 years of medical school, you've got another 4 years of residency, another 3 or 4 years of fellowship, and by the time you get onto your 2 feet, you're already ready for geriatrics. So it is impossible. Today, it is absolutely impossible to assimilate medical knowledge in 4 years. It is impossible. So what we've got to teach our students is how to access. So if you're going to be a cardiologist, do you know how to access the best journals? Do you know how to synthesize the knowledge from using electronic media? So it's not facts anymore, and that's important. And the people who are just learning the textbooks off by heart will never be able to keep up. And so that's the one corollary to your question. The second is that we're becoming super specialized. And even if you're in a specialty today, our specialties do not take cognizance of the vastness of medical knowledge. If you're an oncologist, if you're going to be treating leukemia or breast cancer or uterine cancer, they're completely different diseases with different sets of problems and differential diagnoses and therapies and new treatments coming out every week. So we have to be able to teach our students how to select quality knowledge. And that, I think, is a new skill set which a few years ago we were not really sensitized to.
Okay. Well, I want to take some time to let the audience interact with us and with our panelists. So, Paul, I'm going to let you take the
I'm coming to you,
mic
Larry.
and-
I see the hand. It went up quickly.
I'd like to congratulate all three of you, and especially the institution of Cedars-Sinai, because I've watched you through my whole career here in Pasadena develop one after another programs, all with private money, private family support, and succeed. And I think that's very important at this particular time that we ask, what will we need to succeed in the future? Are you going to be able to succeed with private support, or are you going to have to rely on uncle? Or do you think you can successfully rely on both entities, both Uncle Sam and the large private support in this country?
That's a great question. Thank you. Our mission is that we are a charity, and we provide over almost 24% of our revenues to community service. So we serve over $1.2 billion a year for charitable purposes, for people who can't afford care, for people who need food, going into their communities. So we're committed to that. That hasn't changed in over 100 years. And that is driven by the hospital margin and by philanthropy and by Medicare, basically. And as that gets tighter and tighter, and as the needs of the uninsured patient get larger, you're absolutely right. We're going to reach breaking point. And this county, this state, is miserable in the way it supports indigent care. Indigent care is really carried by a lot of private charity, and it's not enough. We have millions of people in children in our county, in this great, rich county that we all live in, who are hungry, who don't have access to medical care, and we do provide that. I'll give you one fantastic example. 9 months ago, we had a gentleman who was unemployed, poor, living on the street. He came into our emergency room ill. He left 3 months later with 4 new organs. 4. Heart, liver, lung, and kidney. And he is alive today. And we're very proud of that. But it's unsustainable. It's unsustainable. And I don't know the answer to your question, because as government support goes down, there's a limit to private philanthropy. We as a society are going to have to answer your question. I think it's a great question, and all of us as responsible citizens, and certainly those of us who are involved in healthcare, have to deal with that question. And I thank you for bringing it up.
Another question?
I'm coming to you, Bill.
Thank you for a great presentation. My question goes to something Julie asked and that you all responded to, which we live in the world of omics. We've got the microbiome that reaches our brain within seconds. We've got the metabolome. We've got the genome. We've got the transcriptome, we've got the proteome, and all of those things. So we live in the world of systems biology with everything interconnected in beautiful ways, where you realize the first rule is a system. You can't change just one thing. If you exercise, it changes not just your muscles, but your heart and your kidneys and your liver and everything else. And so, which I think was the point you were making. And so the question is, with AI and this vast stream of information that's coming through, and the ability to visualize, which it can do with generative AI, these beautiful clouds, and I'm always amused with with scientific data visualization.
Yeah.
Some of it's very creative, but it says artist's conception. And it's true in astronomy. It's been true in cell biology forever. And in molecular biology, is that true? And you look at it and you say, well, we accept some of those things. But as these things come, that has tremendous power to motivate and tremendous power to educate. And the journals are now giving a one pager in most things, or a short video of most of their articles. So even clinicians aren't really reading the article and checking the references in a lot of cases. You check where it came from, which is what you said. But what do we do to have a trusted editorial groups validate the stream of information that comes out in what could be a great cloud, a great, beautiful picture of how omics is working in our bodies and what's happening when we do therapeutics. And when you ask the basic questions, if kids can see that, it drives curiosity. It's Julia's question, why? And that starts to answer why and how and what the interconnections are.
Just to understand, so was your question about how to validate that this data is accurate?
Validate, yeah, if that stream that Shlomo mentioned of data coming down the AI stream, if those omics interconnections
are real,
are generating data and they're generating pictures of how things are,
yeah,
how can you validate to show that those things are true and not fake and not manipulated? Because you can look at that and it might not be right, just like.
Yeah,
So,
I mean,
really
there is sort of this, you have to boil it down to something that you can experimentally validate, right? And, so couple of things, right? If you're looking at biomarker discovery, you have, like genomics, transcriptomics, metabolomics, proteomics, right? All the omics, multi-omics. And what is it you're really trying to do? You're trying to predict. And so if you have 7 parameters, you can fit a curve to an elephant, right? So there's this issue of overfitting. Just because you throw more and more and more variables, that something doesn't make it better, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that whenever you're looking at these multi-omics approaches, you really have to ask yourself, what is the smallest common denominator, and how can I use that to really experimentally validate whether my, prediction is accurate, right? So it's not just beautiful pictures, but at the end of the day, what does that mean? Now, that being said, we now have advances where Vericyte, for example, is a company that is using transcriptomics to predict, basically whether you have a cancer malignant, or like whether a growth is malignant or benign, right? And so here you're using omics technology, transcriptomics, gene expression analysis with AI and machine learning to basically do something that a cytopathologist is unable to do, right? If you're looking at a certain sample where it's indeterminate, where you don't know whether it's malignant or benign, you can actually predict what the actual clinical outcome is going to be. So, I mean, these things are definitely used, but they have to be validated. And you have to run extensive clinical studies to show that your predictions are actually true, because everybody can make pretty pictures. And I mean, that's one thing that's in general true. Oftentimes in scientific discovery, if you can get it done once, you can get a journal article. To get a product out to market, you have to do it over and over and over again, right?
Yeah.
Actually, I totally agree with you. And I'll give you an example of what is being done today to answer your question. Is we're actually creating disease avatars. So when a patient comes in, and we've actually validated this for pancreatic cancer, when a patient comes in with pancreatic cancer, we do all the omics that you've mentioned, and then take those and build a picture of an avatar that looks like the patient with pancreatic cancer. And after validation of that avatar, that it really is a representation of the patient with pancreatic cancer, you can then go in and ask questions and say, if I have 1,000 avatars, which ones die early? You can actually pick up, and it's accurate. You can say, if their omic in, I don't know, bacteriome or the proteome has got this connectivity with a genomic avatar of that same patient, that patient will be dead in 2 years, whereas if they don't, they will be alive after 10 years. And that has been validated. So we can actually do exactly what you're saying in beautiful 3D color, build this avatar and use the avatar to predict what the outcome would be. And hopefully now, this hasn't been validated, so don't quote me, hopefully now to actually choose a medication which will be most effective for that specific holistic omic. And I think that is going to be the future of the benefit of what you're asking. But I totally agree with you. The validation is going to be very important. And another way to answer your question to validate is what a lot of us are doing now is actually creating induced pluripotent stem cells from the patient. So I'll give you an example of what you're asking. So as you know, ovarian cancer is quite common in women with a BRCA mutation. And so what we've done now is we've actually we've taken stem cells from these women, just saliva or from hair, not from the ovary. And we actually grow up the induced pluripotent stem cell from the woman and create an ovary in the dish, generated from a stem cell in your saliva or your hair. And that organoid that now has the BRCA mutation in it, growing in the dish, develops cancer in the dish. And that translation is a huge advantage now for drug discovery. But now, instead of having to do clinical trials on thousands of women, testing out all sorts of toxic drugs, we can now do that in her own organoid, derived not from her ovary, but from her stem cell induced. And I think that'll be the immediate application of the great question that you're asking.
I told you, we're going to have an exciting decade ahead. Any final questions? One, John, finish us out.
Do you think the peer review system is still working?
A nice question we can all agree on.
So when you say peer review, are you talking about publications or proposals? Publications?
Both.
Both.
Yeah.
Has it been working? Well, I mean, it's tricky. And I mean, ultimately, it comes down to the integrity of the reviewer, right? I mean, humans are flawed, and so the peer review is flawed, right? And I think that as a peer reviewer, you have to be very, very, I mean, you have to be critical, but you also have to give benefit of the doubt, right? So you don't shoot somebody else's ideas down. Or like when you have a paper, so you basically just outright say, you know, like this cannot be published, like not recommended for publication, but you actually look into it and you try to understand, you know, like what are the pieces that need to be refined and how do you want to, you know, further develop, right? So I think that the peer review works as long as the peer reviewers act ethically and with scientific rigor.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. The big problem today, in fact, there have been several articles in the last few weeks on that question. There are now AI-driven peer review mills where you can actually pay and get your paper reviewed by AI, and they will give you a good review. And it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. Every week there are hundreds of these journal mills which are being closed down. Our society journals, I don't know about your societies, but our society journals now have a huge, they do, for example, if they get a manuscript for peer review and the email address is not a bona fide institution, like a Gmail address, they won't even review the paper, because that is a sign that it's perhaps just a paper mill and it's generated by AI. So it's a significant problem. I'm not as confident as you are in human integrity, and a large portion of articles which are being peer reviewed today are suspect because of that, and the journals are retracting hundreds of articles every week. I don't know what the solution is going to be, but again, the regulators have to be ahead of the technology, and they're not.
And I'll just add, I'm amazed always. I'm so impressed by the scientific review committees that we convene at BrightFocus. I mean, they really, they make tough calls. They really, I think, bring the highest level of integrity. The amount of personal commitment and intellectual weight that they put into every aspect of the process, really incredible. And that said, I think coming back to what you were saying earlier, there's an opportunity to rethink some of that process, because it's still contingent upon you having this like fully resolved, fully baked, all your preliminary data and everything. And I wish there were more of an iterative process. And I think we're in an era where we could do that. And there's more interdisciplinary collaboration, more iterative, particularly on the small business innovation side. So, we put together a proposal, we submit it to NIH, and the reviewers could go in God knows what direction with it and bring God knows what biases. It would, to me, there's an opportunity to kind of co-develop, co-design, and I think we quash a lot of great ideas too early because there's not that iterative process, and we're in an era where that should be really readily doable. Yeah.
And it's interesting because NSF has a fundamentally different review process than NIH, right? At the NSF, the program director actually guides the review, right. And there you have some level of iteration. Like I remember when I got my first NSF grant, there were some questions that needed answering, right? The program director contacted me and actually said, well, like your proposal, but here's a couple of things. What's your answer? And I knew that if I got that answer right, I got the money.
I'm going to apply to NSF next.
Yes, NIH doesn't do that, right? In NIH, you have the Center for Scientific Review, and you have your institutes, and and also the sheer volume, right? NSF is handling much fewer proposals. At NIH, you just got to get through them, right? So there you don't have that iteration. But the one thing that I like about NIH, if you have the right study section, they will allow for that, discussion, right? And if the reviewers are have the right mindset that they really want to give the right science a chance, somebody will step up and will support your idea and hopefully convince the panel that it's worth it. Yeah.
Well, our time has come to a close, and I just can't thank all of you for being here, part of the audience, and the panelists for an extraordinary conversation. I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that some of the things that we talked about up here, like pluripotent stem cells, are happening right here at HMRI. We're doing pluripotent stem cell research to do a similar process to looking at something like schizophrenia and finding a treatment for someone who has schizophrenia without having to go through the trial and error that someone has to go through for a psychotropic drug that's going to help them. So more to come and more conversation. I invite you to come to our reception just outside in the hallway at the end of this. And if you have other questions for the panelists, I'm sure they'll be there to chat with you. But thank you again for being here.
Please join us in thanking the panelists.
Thank you so much.